Listen to this. In 1994, when I got elected and we had a teacher strike, the contract that culminated after that strike had entry-level teachers earning $33,000 a year. A single teacher with 2 kids qualified for food stamps at that salary. We were building elementary schools for 500 kids for $10 to $12 million, exclusive of land, in the 90s. Today, a starting teacher, the last contract prior to this one that they're having discussions about now, I believe $56,000 was the entry level for a teacher. The new elementary school at Inlet View, which is a half-size school, is upwards of $30 million. Why are schools costing 3 to 6 times more and teachers aren't even making twice what they made in 94? There's something seriously wrong with this picture. And furthermore, they don't even get Social Security.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is Harriet Drummond. First elected to the Anchorage School Board in 1994, where she served for 9 years, Harriet went on to represent West Anchorage on the Anchorage Assembly, leaving that post when she was elected to the Alaska State House in 2012, where she represented North Midtown and where she chaired or co-chaired the House Education Committee for 6 years. In 2022, she lost her seat due to redistricting, which left her in a largely new district and challenging another incumbent, Representative Zach Fields of downtown Anchorage. Now, 3 years out of office, Harriet offers her reflections on her career and insight into the issues that matter most to her, which is primarily public education. Her husband of 21 years, rural economic developer Elston Lawson, was yesterday's podcast guest, and they both have been integral members of the Alaska Democratic Party for many decades. Harriet Drummond, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Andrew. It's wonderful to be here and to be here with you.
So tell us about your early life.
I grew up in the Bronx. I was born at Jewish Memorial Hospital in Manhattan in 1952, and my dad was a grocer. He had a little neighborhood grocery store in Harlem. He worked very hard. He worked 6 days a week. He worked Sundays until 2 p.m., and his day off was Wednesday. So we didn't have weekends with Dad. We had Wednesdays with Dad, which made for an interesting family life. And my mom raised us 3 kids until our dad passed away. I was 17 when he passed, and then she went into retail and did her best to raise her kids, and she did a terrific job. And I had a terrific
education. She lived to be 100.
She lived 101.
Wow.
A year and a half ago, she passed at 101. She got to see her kids enter their 60s and 70s, and it was amazing. And I was privileged to be with her when she took her last breath. And we lived in the Bronx until I left for Alaska from the Bronx. I went to the Bronx High School of Science in addition to excellent primary and secondary education in the Bronx in New York City. And in college at Cornell University, I met an architecture student who left for Alaska in the mid-'70s for the building boom here, the pipeline boom. And I followed him up here after about a year of his being here. And I moved to Alaska, lock, stock, and barrel, from LaGuardia, Northwest Airlines, or as we used to call it, Northwest Airlines. And I stepped off the plane 50 years ago on February 2nd. I will be celebrating 50 years.
In 1976.
In 1976. And it was gorgeous here. It was sunny and snowy, and I learned how to drive a stick shift VW. It was quite the experience.
And that guy, was that your first husband?
No, we never married.
You never married.
Yeah, we hung out together for 5 years, and he left to go to Harvard Business School and didn't give me the right kind of invitation, so I stayed behind and met another guy who was my first husband, Gary, the father of my sons, and we bought this house together in 1984, and I've been here ever since.
What did you do?
My then architect boyfriend was working his architecture job in the daytime, and in the evenings he was working the night shift at a local print shop at Ken Ray's Printing on Fireweed, which no longer exists. And he said, they have a job for you if you want to come. And at the time, New York City was not full of jobs. The economy wasn't doing great. So I said, sure, I'll come. So I came. I went to work for printers initially. I put my degree in design and environmental analysis from Cornell. I put it on the shelf and I just paid attention to print production, how to get a job from the front counter out the back door without having to, destroy anything or redo anything or reprint stuff. And that was an absolutely fascinating education because a couple of years later, I went into business for myself as a graphic designer and never looked back. And the printers always loved to see me coming because they knew they could accomplish my projects easily. I was always prepared.
Hey, I want to bounce back. Were both your parents Greek?
Yes. Well, my mother was born in Yugoslavia, but raised in Greece by her aunt. And my dad was the son of Greek immigrants who came in the late 1800s and raised on a farm in Staten Island, of all things. And so, yeah.
And did you know your grandparents?
I knew only my paternal grandmother, after whom I'm named. My Greek name is Charista. And my parents thought about that for a bit when they named me. And they said, Americans are going to have a really tough time pronouncing Charista with that he and the ro. And so they named me the closest English equivalent they could find, which was Harriet. And I have never in my life met another Greek American named Harriet. And my maiden name is Anagnostis, which is also a mouthful, but I use that as my middle name. And when I was in the legislature and I met women legislators from around the country, I met Senator Sandy Pappas from Minnesota, who invited me to join the World Hellenic Interparliamentary Association, which was an organization that the Hellenic Parliament in Greece funds. And they invite legislators and parliamentarians of Greek ethnic origin from all over the world every couple of years to Athens to have a meeting and catch up on what's going on in the world.
Did you go?
Absolutely. I went in 2015, took Elston, had an absolute blast. I met people there who I'm still in communication with. And I was truly surprised at how many Greek diasporas there are around the world. In particular, Australia has a huge Greek diaspora.
Did your parents speak Greek?
Yes, I didn't speak English till I went to kindergarten.
Really?
Yep. Yeah, we took Greek lessons, private at home. I couldn't have asked for a better first language than Greek because it really helped me decipher English. And I made both my kids do Greek school during elementary school. And the older one...
In Anchorage?
In Anchorage.
We have Greek school here?
The Greek Orthodox Church offers Greek lessons. There are folks within the Greek community that offer Greek lessons. And when he went to Stellar Secondary and took Latin, he came home all excited. He said, Ma, between Greek and Latin, I can decipher just about any language. So it was just really exciting to be able to share that with them. And then my younger son, when he got to West High School and enrolled in the Russian class, his Russian teacher said, "Where did you get that accent?" Because his accent was spot on. He may have not known what he was talking about, but his accent was terrific. He said, "My mother made me go to Greek school when I was a kid."
That's so interesting. I mean, I assume you know all the Greeks in Anchorage.
Quite a few of them, yeah. The Greeks in Anchorage, most of them run most of the Italian restaurants in Anchorage. There's a few Greek-only cuisines, but every Italian restaurant serves baklava and a Greek dish or two. And Matsu also are involved in the Greek Orthodox Church, which is the northernmost Greek Orthodox church in the world. And we're very proud of that organization.
So back to Anchorage, graphic design, printers love you when you show up, you're prepared, you've got everything locked and loaded, and you did that, had your two boys.
Between working for printers and then working for architects, I went to work for Vico.
Oh, so Bill Allen's company.
That's right. In 1989, one of the architects that I worked with invited me to work for Vico's architecture and engineering division. And
I just want to say for folks so they understand, so this is a very important period. Bill Allen's purchasing the Anchorage Times from...
That was before...
Bob Atwood.
That was after I worked for Vico.
Okay.
That was in the 80s.
Okay, so bought it
afterwards.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it was coming up it's important.
That's right. That's right.
It's really important.
I was in the ground level. Vico was a company that had gotten its start in the Kenai Peninsula oil fields out in the
and what Vico did is they did all the other stuff.
All oil field support services. Oil field support services. One of the most fascinating experiences I had while there was a friend of mine who did communications for then Sohio, later known as BP, was involved in the partnership with Vico when they built a couple of drilling rigs. And I believe that was also with Doyon and Fairbanks. And she wanted to create a film record of the construction of those rigs, the transportation of those rigs, which were the first drilling rigs built in Alaska, 100%, to the North Slope. And these were built by Vico. And as Vico's communications person, kind of by default, I was a graphic designer. They didn't have a PR firm at the time or anything like that, but I handled all that stuff for them. I was sent with a film crew with Hillary Hilscher, who many people know here, and a friend of hers who was a National Geographic photographer. And we flew to Fairbanks and were given a big Suburban to transport us from Vico's facility in Fairbanks. And we drove to, I believe it was Coldfoot Camp, where we were going to wait for the drilling rigs to arrive on their huge, various huge long trucks and all that stuff. And Vico had screwed up with the permitting, and we had to hang out and play ping pong and eat popcorn for about a week before the trucks got there, while they got their permits to take these oversized, over-length loads up all of Alaska's major highways to get them to the slope. And then we preceded them. We had already scoped out all the camera angles on the haul road, and we had radios, and we talked to them, and we told them when to proceed along a valley so we could get the shots and all that stuff. And we got them going through Attican Pass. And then on the other side, there was this horrific snowstorm all the way into Prudhoe Bay. And we were sandwiched between a pilot car and a semi-tractor trailer, and told to keep an eye on the bumper in front of us because we couldn't see a damn thing otherwise. And it was a perfectly terrifying drive to Prudhoe Bay.
I bet.
But we got there safely, and I took tons of pictures of drilling rigs under construction and being moved on the North Slope with these fantastic machines. And it was a real education.
Did you know Bill Allen?
I did. He didn't know me. He didn't know who I was, but I knew who he was. He was on the second floor running the whole show. And it was interesting to watch from a distance as this company developed.
So then what happened? What did you do after Vico?
That was when I was invited by a printer to produce a couple of their publications every month in exchange for office space, a studio space in their facility downtown. And I worked for them for a couple of years. I did the work and I got the space in exchange, and I developed a list of other clients. And then I opened my own home office in Airport Heights with a group of other interesting folks in a duplex next door to our first home in Airport Heights. And then we moved here, and I moved my office into the house upstairs. And I think
and you've been in this house
since 1984.
I assume you remember the day when Elston knocked on your door.
I do. I remember.
And it was this house.
I remember looking down the stairs and seeing him looking up at me from the bottom of the stairs and going, "Who the hell is this guy?" I was running for the assembly seat that was eventually won by Dan Sullivan, and I believe I was his only opponent that year. And although I didn't win the race, I won Elston in that process.
Was that your first run for office?
Oh, no. That was about my fourth one. I first ran for school board in 1993. And this was after my son was in a relocatable classroom on the campus of North Star Elementary School, where they had 11 relos. They had 550 kids going to school in a building that was built for 350. That school was the original Catholic junior high school. So it's the only elementary school in Anchorage that has lockers. And the teachers all loved it because it kept the kids from spreading disease amongst themselves and all that stuff. And I went to work with the PTA and legislators and got North Star, I think it was a $6 million or so grant. No strings attached, no bond issues attached to it, to build a major addition to that school. I think we added 11 classrooms to it and a library and a new office.
So basically, you got motivated
By my son's
by
situation.
your son's situation
That's
of
right.
like way too many kids for way too small of a school.
That's right. That's right.
And you ran for school board in 93.
Right. That was a couple
you
of
won.
years later. No, the first year I did not win. There was a recall of 4 school board members
I
in
know this story.
1992. And
Can you remind us about what happened with that?
yes, there were the 4 members,
So Walter Featherly,
Carol Stolpe, Dorothy, whose last name I forget, and Cabot Christensen. These 4 of the 7 members of the school board decided that they were going to have a secret meeting in which they chose one of themselves as the new school board president. And then they came out of that secret meeting and
held an
had a
election.
vote and knocked off Daryl Jordan, who had been the president. And he remained on the board. They all remained on the board. But because they had this secret meeting, they were breaking the rules. The Open
How did
Meetings
the
Act.
secret meeting become known?
I don't recall. It's been
recall.
such a long
Gotcha.
time.
But anyway, so there was a recall and they got recalled.
There was a recall election scheduled for, I believe it was December of 1992. And the 4 of them looked at each other and go, it looks like we're going to get recalled. But what's going to happen if 4 of us get recalled from the 7-member board? That leaves 3 members, which is not a quorum. And one of them was Teresa Obermeyer. Another one was, I believe it was Sharon Richards. And I don't remember the third remaining person. Oh, Daryl Jordan.
Daryl,
That's right. And the mayor at the time would have had to appoint a 4th board member so that they would have a quorum, and then they could go about appointing replacements for those who would lose their seats in the recall election. One of the 4 to be recalled, Cabot Christensen, who's an attorney who lived over here in Huntington Park, decided to resign early. And that triggered an appointment process by the 6 remaining board members. And I first applied to be one of those appointed people. And I found myself winnowed out from about 40 applicants and seated at the front table in front of the 6 members of the school board with Debbie Osander and Chugiak. And she and I are looking at each other and go, who is this woman who's done all this work in her neighborhood for schools? And I've never heard of her. And they ended up choosing Debbie, who then served about 10 years, I think, on the school board. And I ran that spring.
Tom Fink, was that the mayor at the time?
Tom Fink was the mayor at the time, but he didn't get to appoint
Got it.
anybody because Cabot had resigned. So
Right.
the school board handled all of that stuff. And then the remaining 3 got recalled. And there were the usual 2 seats up in that spring election and the additional 3 that had to be replaced by election. And I think Debbie had to run for election to the one that she'd just gotten appointed to. So there was a massive number of school board candidates. And I was in one seat that a woman had run for once or twice before. And my campaign manager and I knew it was a long shot, but we did it anyway. And it was a really good experience.
They weren't at large then?
They've always been at large.
They've always been
They've
at large.
always been at large.
Okay.
And so it's like running a mayoral campaign on a shoestring budget.
Exactly.
I think I raised $12,000 the first year.
Wow.
And that was a lot of money. But my manager made me go door to door in 2 precincts that did not allow yard signs, which was really the way you got the word out for a school board. And that was Bayshore and Geneva Woods. And I went to the post office in Girdwood on weekends and met people on Saturday mornings when they went to the post office.
It's so funny that you had to do campaign work in Girdwood. I mean, but yeah.
Everywhere from Girdwood to Eklutna. It was really cool. And on a school board campaign, you can't really go door to door.
Right.
But
you can't do the whole city.
except that I went to those 3 precincts and met people. And when the election results came in, I didn't win the race, but I won those 3 precincts.
Interesting.
Yes.
So were you door knock?
And I met people years later when I was running for the House seat in Geneva Woods, because that was in my district.
And they remembered you.
They remembered me, and they remembered voting for me, and it was just such a satisfying feeling. Such a satisfying feeling.
Yeah.
And I remember...
That is a great advertisement for folks who think that door knocking is something they don't need to do. You know what I mean? Like, people who I'll send out a mailer. I won't go door knocking. Door knocking really was the difference.
You need to touch people 7 or 8 times. in order for them to remember who you are. And door knocking is part of that. But it's really hard to do on a citywide race.
Right.
The thing that amazes me about the new mayor of New York, he had over 100,000 volunteers. They knocked on 3.1 million doors. To me, that's remarkable. And having volunteers like that is invaluable. Invaluable. But getting elected to the school board, the following year in 94, there were 6 people running for Teresa Obermeyer's seat, including Teresa. And it was very interesting. There was this...
And I'll just say for listeners, Teresa Obermeyer ran against Ted Stevens for the Senate seat a few years later. There's a very famous video that people have watched on YouTube of their contentious exchange. Just leave it at that.
Teresa is an absolute character.
Yes.
And she and I always maintained a cordial relationship. I worked my tail off on that 1994 campaign with 6 people running. There was a guy called himself a conservative who came in second, who said, I'm the only conservative in this race and blah, blah, blah. He claimed to have served on the school board in Adak, which no longer existed because they had shut down the base in Adak. And he had some former girlfriend or wife with a restraining order on him to keep him away from his own children somewhere on the East Coast. And I didn't have the resources to, track down this guy. So I just ran my tail off and I won with, listen to this, 42% of the vote in a 6-way race. And
including the incumbent.
Including the incumbent. She was like trailing. She was like third place. And that conservative guy was like 16 or 17 points behind me. So that was a good showing. And that was my first term. And I was the only new school board member that year. And in May of 94, I got installed. And in October of 94, we had the first teacher strike since 1979. And I spent many hours in the school district's labor relations director's office learning about labor relations and contracts. The school district at the time, I think, had 8 separate bargaining units, with teachers, of course, being the largest one. It was an absolutely fascinating education. And we couldn't scare up any more money. It's always been a struggle for school districts to be adequately funded. And somewhere I have a Anchorage Times clipping of, why are the teachers striking this absolutely teacher-friendly school board and I got elected the same year that Rick Meistrom got elected. And I was always on the mayoral cycle, which is a bigger voter turnout cycle than the 2 alternate years when there's just assembly races. And so there was always more of a turnout. People were paying more attention to the campaigns.
One question. So when you ran the first time and lost, you won the precincts, but you lost the election. I'm really interested in folks, and it seems fairly common, who lose their first race and then run again. Were you at all discouraged by losing, or did you go in thinking that it was a long shot?
I went in thinking it was a long shot in the 93 race. At the time, there was a great organization called the Alaska Women's Political Caucus that existed strictly to mentor women and support women in campaigns for every level of office, as well as support positions like managers and treasurers and all of that essential stuff. And they prepared us not only to win, but to lose. You have to go into a campaign prepared to lose, but fight like hell to win. That's the whole point. And so I ran 4 times for school board and succeeded 3 of those times. My terms ended in 2003, but I ran in 99 for the open assembly seat in West Anchorage.
That's where you met Elsa.
That's when I met Elsa.
Yeah. So you were still on the school board, but running for assembly.
That's right. And that was tricky because everything happens in the spring. Budget work happens in the spring and all of that sort of thing. And I had not gone extensively door to door before. At the time, assembly seats had about 53,000 people in them. And I was in West Anchorage, which was everything west of Arctic Boulevard to the inlet and down to Diamond Boulevard and the rural end of Diamond. And I was going door to door in Sand Lake, and I think Elson was helping me. And I distinctly remember getting to know him during that campaign. But I didn't win. But at the same time, Dan Sullivan was a member of a...
To be clear, George Sullivan's son, Dan Sullivan.
That's right.
not
That's right. Not
current Senator
not the current
Dan
senator.
Sullivan.
Absolutely not.
Right.
And he won, and he served 3 terms in the assembly, and after which he took a year or 2 break and then ran for mayor. But that was my last school board term. And then in 2003, I was the chair of the Federation of Community Councils. So in the meantime, while I was serving on the school board, I was active in my local community council.
Is this Spenard? Are we in Spenard right now?
No, you're North Star. Everything
Okay.
north of Fire
Gotcha.
is North Star. And that was about the time that we reorganized the community councils for the first time since they'd been established in the 70s. And changed some boundaries, created Midtown Community Council. So there were lots of changes that went into place at the time. And I remember some of the folks who'd been active in community councils were upset with me because I was a serving school board member, yet I was chair of the federation. But I found the rules, and the rules are you couldn't be a candidate.
Well, it's interesting.
And running. I said, I'm not a candidate anymore. I am serving.
When we have school board members come and present to our community councils, because now I go to a few, it would be unusual, I think, to think that they were actually also chairing FCC, the Federation of Community Councils, or, you know what I mean? Like, I can understand why people would think that was unusual, because it would feel weird.
Well, there was a rule. And the rule was you had to be a candidate to have to resign. And I was no longer a candidate. I'd been in office for several years. And in fact, I was in my final year, and I said, I don't know what you're worrying about, because they tried to unseat me. They ran into the roadblock of, oh, this is not what the rule is. So,
right.
So it was fine. And I served and learned a lot. I met people from all over the city as a result of that.
I'm sure you did. Is there a particular story or lesson that you learned from being on the school board for all that time?
Number one, be involved in your local community. I actually got elected because of the facilities issues we had at the time. We had not just the 11 relos at North Star Elementary School. We had kids in 150 relocatable classrooms throughout the district. That's the equivalent of 6 elementary schools full of kids, and they were called unhoused at the time if they didn't have a solid roof over their heads. And I got elected in the same year as
I think it's like, just for people who don't know what a relo is, it's like a trailer that's being used as a classroom.
Yeah, it's a purpose-built building. It's about 1,000 square feet, 900 or 1,000 square feet. So yeah, it's trailerable, but it takes up way more space than
It's bigger than a mobile
trailer.
home.
Oh yeah, much bigger. And once it's in place, it's hard to move because they're kind of fragile. And like North Star, that put a lot of pressure on the main building, which was built for 350 kids. And you had 550 kids and not enough toilets and that sort of thing. Lunchroom was a problem, all of those kinds of issues. But in 94, when I got elected for the first time, a $175 million bond issue was passed for the school district, which built 2 new middle schools and 4 new elementary schools and dozens of additions and renovations and expansions and that sort of thing. So I got elected along with a big facilities issue, and I knew my way around the facilities issues of the district, but I didn't know that much about the actual education policy, all of that stuff, the budgetary stuff. I learned so much as a school board member, and I pretty much kept my mouth shut for that first 6 or 8 months. I remember not really speaking during board meetings until about December of that year, until I really was comfortable in what I was talking about. I also urged my fellow school board members to attend their local community councils, and eventually the superintendent said, we need to send school board members to the community councils in the high school attendance areas which they represent. We were rotated through the high school attendance areas. The other thing you learn as a school board member is the superintendent is your only employee. That is your job, is to hire and or fire the superintendent, which we never had to do. But a superintendent search is a really interesting process. And I went through at least one of those. And you don't get to go into a school and, for instance, tell a teacher or principal what to do. You have to route your concerns through the superintendent. And I had 2 really good superintendents. Bob Crystal was in place when I got elected the first time. And we got to choose Carol Como, who was also in the wings. She was in the administration. And she had come up from Noon Duty in Ocean View, where her kids went to school, all the way through the administrative process. And she had been a school principal as well, and then became the superintendent during my term in 2000.
So FCC. Right now, and I'm sure it's been going on for decades, House reps are required to go to their community councils. I guess you're not required to. I mean, I go to my community councils, but a complaint that I would say is that we have a lot of community councils that are small, that have the same folks who've been going for decades.
I'm fortunate. North Star is the smallest community council in the municipality. And I think we have about 3,000 residents. And part of the look that we took at boundaries in the early 2000s was that Northeast Community Council, which has over 30,000 people.
I think even more than that now.
One.
It's like, I think it's over 40,000 now.
It's crazy.
And they have over 100 people that show up. Mm-hmm. They have to run a very regimented meeting where no one can talk for longer than a certain amount of time. They've got a timer. The timer's going off. Stop talking. But it's because they have just so many
It's too big.
Folks.
And I understand they're working on shrinking it. But even that process has
it's
been
democratic
long,
and the people don't want to. And, I have talked a lot about this with a lot of people. I think the narrative that Northeast Community Council is too big, that we might need to shift our perspective. And it might mean that a lot of community councils are too small. And because the thing about it is Northeast Community Council, the folks who attend it, no one's complaining about it being too big. Mm-hmm. And maybe it is a more sustainable model. They have a more robust discussion, a more involved membership by representing that many people. And so maybe instead of having 37 different community councils, maybe we should cut that number in half and double the sizes. I don't know.
Or even
no one's saying this, by the way.
Kind of like house districts, right?
Yes.
Every house district has the same,
number of people.
Approximately the same number of people in it. And it's much more manageable. As a school board member, as I said, we had to break it up because there were too many for everybody to go to. But by high school attendance area was a good way to do it. And I'll tell you what I really appreciate is at North Star, we had the school principal attended regularly and even became an officer at one point, which is very valuable when your school is the site for a community council meeting. But just getting neighborhood participation is wonderful.
Okay, let's talk about Assembly.
Yeah.
So you got elected. You represent West Anchorage.
Yep, I got elected in 2008. Along with Elvie Gray Jackson and Patrick Flynn, Heather Flynn's son, who also served on the Assembly.
Elvie Gray Jackson, I believe when she was elected the first time, she defeated Dave Bronson for that Midtown Assembly seat.
I know he ran against her at least once. Mm-hmm. And then he moved to a different area that he might have had more luck in. But, people who don't serve on the Assembly don't have a good handle on what it takes to be mayor. And Dave was one of those people, and we know how his mayoral service turned out. But let's see, it was me and Elvie and Mike Gutierrez and Patrick Flynn. We flipped the Assembly from conservative to progressive. And it was the first year that we had iPhones. I've got a front page picture of me and Elvie from the Anchorage Daily News looking at our iPhones, horizontally so we could see the charts and just whooping it up at Snow City Cafe. It was really a fun time. So that was my second run at Assembly, and I won. And I served 5 years total. So that was 3 races, 2. And then I ran for the House after the redistricting in 2012. And I won the House seat in 2012 and left the Assembly. And I could hear Dan Sullivan rubbing his hands in glee because they had some anti-union stuff they wanted to pass. And they managed to appoint Cheryl Frasca, who was a conservative budget hawk, in order to get something passed, which they later negated after the Assembly got its balance back. So
Cheryl Frasca was appointed to replace you for your Assembly seat, and
she couldn't.
And I guess
get
again, Dan Sullivan was the mayor, so a conservative mayor serving while you were on the Assembly, and then appointed Cheryl Frasca, who also was, I believe, the OMB director for Mayor Bronson. For a while, at least.
She served the public in a number of ways. She's very competent, but also, very conservative. And she didn't have the oomph to get elected to the seat.
Do you have any particular experience that is most vivid from your time on the Assembly?
When Mayor Mark Begich won the U.S. Senate seat and left that happened pretty quickly. I think that was in the winter of 2008.
Yeah, so you won in April 2008. You basically go immediately to serving. And then that election was 2008, was the Senate election where he defeated Ted Stevens.
Right. And Matt Clayman was my partner in West Anchorage.
And Matt Haven became the acting mayor when
Right,
Mark
because
Begich,
he was the chair. He was the assembly chair, and the rule is if the mayor leaves office, the chair of the assembly becomes the acting mayor. And Sheila Selcraig was vice chair at the time, but she did not want to serve as chair. So she resigned from the vice chairmanship, and I got the vice chairmanship. So I became the acting chair of the assembly. And as the media said at the time, there was an awful lot of acting going on in the chamber. And one of the biggest issue that faced me and the rest of the assembly that was not a fiscal issue was, we called it the Summer of Hate, was the anti-discrimination.
2008.
Yeah, the anti-discrimination ordinance that actually then acting mayor Matt Clayman put forward. And others had various versions of that ordinance. It was AO 64, if I recall correctly. And I was vice chair. At that point, Debbie Osiander had become chair. And so Debbie and I had served 9 years together on the school board. And then we served several years together on the assembly. And Debbie had become chair that spring. I didn't remain acting chair for very long, but I sat next to her as vice chair, and we got to face 600 testifiers.
I know. And you know what? And that's still available. You can still listen to that. I had Michael Burke on. He's the
that's right, the pastor,
the priest at St. Mary's Episcopal. And so I have clipped him speaking. I mean, he gave an amazing speech. And he was the minority because he supported the Equal Rights Ordinance. There was a lot of people. Again, it's very reminiscent in some ways to the COVID things where there was busing coming in from the Matsu, people who did not live in Anchorage, who were coming in to show up at Anchorage Assembly meetings to speak against what Anchorage was deciding to do. But Dave Bronson spoke, and I have played on the podcast the clip. In fact, I played it on Michael Burke's episode. I said, here is a more typical testimony. And it was Dave Bronson. And I did it while Dave Bronson was mayor. I played him and what he said in 2008, which was basically that homosexuality wasn't real.
That was an unfortunate turn of events. On the other hand, we had enough votes to pass it. We didn't have enough votes to override or veto. When Dan Sullivan became mayor. That was the problem. The problem with that was it took all summer long. We had 5 meetings, I want to say 30 hours of meetings and 600 people testifying. Barb Jones, who was our clerk at the time, who was absolutely awesome, kept such good minutes that you could go into those minutes for those meetings and all of the speakers were highlighted. So you'd go into the minutes where you weren't able to read what the speaker said, but if you clicked on their highlighted names, it went right to their spot on the video. And a summer or two later, I think the Unitarians in Fairbanks flew me to Fairbanks to talk about the Summer of Hate. And I clipped about 10 of the best videos, and I believe Michael Burke's was among them. And that's what I talked to them in Fairbanks about, was all the amazing people that came out of the woodwork to support our LGBT community. And it was really heartwarming to see it work. It was not heartwarming to see Debbie refuse to change her position on the bill. She could have been the 8th vote to override the mayor, but she declined to do that, which is disappointing because when we served on the school board, we instituted gay-straight alliances, which was quite controversial at the time. But
and it's why Elston was initially interested in you.
That's right. Yeah. That was in about 1997. And we spent a lot of time on that issue as well. Packed school board chambers, all that stuff. And the Gay Straight Alliance was requested by a student. He was the son of who's the gardening, Jeff Lowenfels. It was his son. He was a senior at Diamond High School, and he was on his way to Stanford or some fabulous university. And he wanted gay straight alliances to be established in Anchorage schools. And his teacher sponsor who said, I'm in support of this, is Susan Derrera, who lives right around the corner, who is the daughter of Katie Hurley. And
Katie Hurley, who's of like the Constitutional Convention fame.
Right. She was one of the secretaries to the Constitutional Convention and a longtime devout Democrat in the state. And we ended up passing the Gay Straight Alliance by just 4 votes, I think it was. And one of those votes was Kelly Haney, who was elected to the school board right out of high school. In fact, she had to wait until she graduated before she could be sworn in, because you could not be a student and serve on the school board. And Kelly came from a pretty conservative Republican family, but she knew what it was like in the trenches at school, and particularly at Diamond. And she supported the establishment of Gay Straight Alliances. It was invaluable to have a young member of the school board support this, as well as dozens of students. And you know what? 10 years later, every secondary school had its GSA, and with no fanfare whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So it isn't a big deal. And it's something that kids need, and faculty supports. And it was one of the premier accomplishments. And at the time, there was another issue that involved gay folks. Let me think about this for a second. It'll come to me at some point.
Out North Theater Company.
It was run by a gay couple, mm-hmm. Jay Browse and Jean Dugan. And they were very successful and productive. And they ran a theater program for low-income middle school kids mm-hmm. in East Anchorage. And they had run it for years. And they were in receipt of a substantial grant. I want to say it was a $30,000 grant. I think it was a pass-through grant that might have come from the feds that was funneled through the Assembly and given to them. And one year, the Assembly decided not to give it to them. The Assembly was conservative at that point, and they didn't want to do it. And 3 of my fellow school board members and I looked at the budget, and they go, hey, we have plenty of money. Let's support this group with a $30,000 grant, because they're doing good work for our kids in East Anchorage. And the superintendent didn't like it, because normally memos were produced by the superintendent and the staff that said, here's what we want you to consider and approve. It almost never came from the school board. So it came from the school board, and I'm smiling as I say this because I remember how pissed off Bob Crystal was. But he had to do it because there were 4 of us. We had the votes. Mm-hmm. And so we gave them the grant. And I remember Bob Bell on the Assembly was so mad that we had done this.
Because they were excited to deny them the money.
Yeah, they loved being able to be in control of that. And Bob Bell said, because you gave them $30,000, we're going to take away $300,000 from your budget, which they never actually accomplished. But it was interesting to hear the threats. Mm-hmm. And in the meantime, the theater group did a good job with their productions and their classes. But Bob Crystal, our superintendent, was adamant in getting proof before they got paid. They had to produce, attendance records and production records, and here's what we did and with how many kids and all this other stuff in order to collect the grant monies. But they didn't get to collect all of it because they couldn't prove that they had done all of the work. And what they learned to do was they improved their bookkeeping and their management style. In fact, the State Arts Council helped them do that. I remember they assigned an accountant to get their books straightened out and get them on the straight and narrow. It ended up benefiting everybody, including the kids. And even though the theater group didn't get all the money, they got to improve their function because of the oversight that the school district required. And that was fascinating. So we had some very major issues around gay rights in my time on the school board. And
on the Assembly.
And on the Assembly. And, each time it might have gotten turned around, but eventually it got approved, which is good.
So you got elected to the House in 2012. You were the first person to represent the new district after redistricting.
I succeeded Mike Dugan, who was a famous
former columnist for the ADN.
Former columnist, yes, for the ADN. And the districts had changed completely. His district was very north-south. Mine was very east-west. But I really enjoyed serving my district from Fish Creek to Lake Otis and from Chester Creek to Tudor Road.
Oh, you went all the way to Lake Otis.
Yeah, little bits of Lake Otis.
Gotcha.
And Andy Josephson was the other House member in that Senate district. And my first senator was Berta Gardner, who had stepped up from the House and encouraged me to run for her seat. That's right. She lived in Geneva Woods. And so I met Andy, and we worked together. And
That was his first year as well?
his first year as well. Yeah, I was freshman with Andy and Jonathan Christ Tompkins and Garen Tarr. And I believe there were 13 new members that year, including Peter Machicki, who is now mayor of the Kenai Peninsula Borough, and our current governor.
Mike Dunleavy was also elected in 2012 to the Senate.
That's right.
Yes, because I just had Jonathan Christ Tompkins on the podcast, and he was the chair of State Affairs, and Mike Dunleavy was chair of State Affairs in the Senate. So they had a cordial, constructive working relationship.
And let's see, Shelley Hughes was also a freshman that year, but she had gotten appointed to fill the seat of a fellow from
Carl Gatto,
who had passed away the previous spring.
Who she had run the campaign for. She's also been on the podcast and told this whole story.
That's right. That's right. And Shelley is a character. And Laura Reinbold. I mean, they were all, Lynn Gaddis, they were all kinds of fun people.
And you were in a small minority your first few years.
Yeah, there were just 10 of us. And we lost somebody at some point.
Oh, I know.
We were 9 for a brief period, and we could have lost our offices and our staff. Yes, that's right. Lindsay Holmes switched her registration from Democratic to Republican, and that was fairly brief because we were back up to 13.
So you went at a 9, which is technically not an official minority, and you.
That's right. They could have kicked us out of our offices and taken away our staff, technically.
And you wouldn't be able to serve on committees. Like, you don't have a right to a seat on a committee.
That's right. And as a minority member, there were only 2 of us on the 7-member committee, so you didn't have much sway. And I was just looking at my record. I didn't get to pass any bills then. They were pretty mean about it.
And then you were in the majority. Any particularly memorable experiences during your time in the House?
Well, education was my focus. And I am not a morning person, and somehow I signed up for not 1 but 2 committees that
were 8
a.m. Yeah, 3 times a week, and sometimes on Saturday for community and regional affairs. But I served as the chair of the education committee for 6 years, chair or co-chair with Andy Story for a couple of years, and we had the usual issues: finances.
So you got elected in 2012 from redistricting. You lost in 2022 because of redistricting, where you had 2 progressive members who got redistricted into the same district. So you were running against Zach Fields.
Right. And I had a quarter of my previous district, and he had 3/4 of his previous district. It was an uphill battle for me. I had lots and lots of door-to-door work to do, and people still knew me, but it was definitely balanced the other way. On the other hand, it remained in Democratic hands, which is to be expected from those particular neighborhoods.
And the benefit is that your mother was 97.
She was in her late 90s, early hundreds.
And so
when that happened.
Losing meant that you got to spend time with your mother.
That's right. That's right. And that was a blessing. I'm
going to ask a question. It might be controversial, but when you and Zach Fields were redistricted in the same district, it turned out that the senator, the person who was serving as your senator for those 2 new districts, was Tom Begich. And there was an assumption that he was going to run for re-election. And so that wasn't really something on your radar to run for Senate. But as it turned out, he did not run for re-election. Would you have run for Senate?
I was not interested in running for Senate. I don't remember quite why, but I much preferred the House where I had been. And as it ended up, Lukey Tobin is an awesome senator. I am very pleased to have been able to support her, and she did a good job. I worked with her extensively because she was Tom's education staffer, and she knew her stuff stepping in. And as you can see, she's doing a marvelous job against great odds. It's so frustrating to watch the same old crap get thrown at the education community, and that our kids suffer for that. And on the other hand, I have made myself familiar with the existing school board in Anchorage and advised them. I've known Patrick Hickens for decades. I served with his wife, Patty, in the school board in my first couple of years. She served on the school board as well in the 90s. And he brings a lot of history that the younger board members do not have. And I am concerned that they will close too many schools. And when the legislature gets its act together and properly funds schools.
Well, hey, can I just stop you there?
Yeah, sure.
The legislature doesn't need to get our act together.
You
we've
have
done,
it.
we've
You have
done
to
everything we can to fund schools.
You need to get rid of this governor.
Correct.
That's right.
That's the correction.
That's right. And in order for class size to get smaller, you need classrooms. We were at that place when I was on the school board. We had built like a dozen new elementary schools. My name is on brass plaques all over this town, I'll tell you, in every school. And we considered lowering class size, but we couldn't do it without a significant additional capital investment. And if they close too many schools and repurpose them or sell them, and they all belong to the city, by the way, they will have a really difficult time lowering class size, which is the number one way to improve education. Hands down, every school district knows this. And I was on the school board when charter schools were established. And one of the things I fought was making charter schools pay rent for their facilities, whether it was in a school or whether it was in a commercial facility. That was not fair to make them spend part of their base student allocation on space. Kids at Roaming and West and North Star don't pay rent for those facilities. Yeah, there's utilities allocated, but not rent. So I was very pleased to see them turn over some of these surplus schools to charter schools.
Yeah.
That should have happened in the first place. Well, you know, I'm going to tell you something about this facilities thing. I am very tuned into it because in 94, when we passed that $175 million bond issue, one of the 4 new elementary schools that we built initially was the replacement Muldoon Elementary School. That school and the one that Aquarian is in now, behind the Z Plaza over here on 32nd off Minnesota, identical. They feel like a string of relos together. They're not very solid buildings. They don't have the full complement of multipurpose rooms and all that other stuff. They were identical schools on either side of town. Muldoon School got torn down and replaced with a brand new one. And Aquarian is still going. And they said that there were a number of other schools. Northern Lights ABC was in that school building for the longest time. And when we had so much money left over from that big bond issue that we actually went back to the voters and said, we can afford to build 2 more elementary schools with this money. But because they were not named in the bond issue, we have to ask your permission. And we got the permission, and we built the new Northern Lights ABC school at Dowling and Lake Otis and the replacement Fairview Elementary School. And I voted against that Northern Lights ABC school. You know why?
Why?
Because the ABC school over here on Minnesota had West Anchorage parents attending, driving their schools there. All the charter and optional programs are driving schools. And those parents would then have to drive through the then non-existent roundabouts on Dowling Road, which had hellacious traffic in order to get to the new Northern Lights ABC school. And then a year after we opened that school, the city said, oh, you're going to have to spend another $250,000 to move the driveway because it's too close to Lake Otis and it creates traffic jams because it's a driving school.
Right.
And I voted against that too. I said, this is ridiculous. You guys are making us throw good money after bad. And, you know, it's a fine school and all of that other stuff, but it was incredibly unfair to the previous community that was focused on this location. And meanwhile, that old building that Northern Lights ABC was in housed a number of others. They housed a charter school at a time and ultimately ended up with Aquarian, which is a charter. And my grandson, Elson's grandson, went to school there his whole 7 years. And building is falling apart, but they're now spending money on it because they don't want to dare build a new one. And here's another frustration. Listen to this. In 1994, when I got elected and we had a teacher strike, the contract that culminated after that strike had entry-level teachers earning $33,000 a year. A single teacher with 2 kids qualified for food stamps at that salary. We were building elementary schools for 500 kids for $10 to $12 million, exclusive of land, in the 90s. Today, a starting teacher, the last contract prior to this one that they're having discussions about now, I believe $56,000 was the entry level for a teacher. The new elementary school at Inlet View, which is a half-size school, is upwards of $30 million. Why is it costing 3 and probably 6 times if that was a 500-kid school instead of a 300-kid school? Why are schools costing 3 to 6 times more, and teachers aren't even making twice what they made in 94? There's something seriously wrong with this picture, that contractors get all the money that they ask for to build facilities that eventually have to be replaced, but we don't pay our teachers sufficiently well. And furthermore, they don't even get Social Security. When everybody got booted out of the defined benefit plan in 2006,
before your time. Yeah,
that's right. I had nothing to do with that, but I was horrified to learn that they hadn't even put them back in the Social Security system, which they had opted out of in the 70s when they established the defined benefit system. And Social Security said, sure, you can go ahead and opt your public employees out of Social Security because you are replacing it with an equally good system. Mm-hmm. And they don't have that. And we are losing teachers left and right. That's unacceptable. That's just unacceptable to me. And we really need to fix that. And I know it's going to be hard with this current fiscal situation.
It's a really hard fiscal situation. Mm-hmm. And I guess that kind of brings us to, you've been out of office for 3 years. What are your top line thoughts? I mean, what are your frustrations? What are the things that you think are good? Just tell me something about what you're observing from your vantage point.
First of all, I'm incredibly grateful to KTOO for Gavel to Gavel. And I hope the legislature realizes that this is an incredible gift and finds a way to fund that, which the legislature has never done. So that is a really important way to keep the public engaged.
Yeah, so for folks understand, every committee meeting, every floor session is visible in real time. Right. It's visible live, mm-hmm. and then it can be watched later because it is recorded.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And, to wait for minutes or any of those things that the legislature keeps itself, it would make it impossible to keep up with what the legislature is doing. So we are incredibly fortunate that we have live access and archived access to any meeting that we want to from our living rooms or our, if we don't want to get out of bed in the morning, we want to watch.
Right.
And I am a gavel junkie. That's what I do. But I know how it operates. And I know the kinds of meetings that are happening behind closed doors. But it's also really valuable to be able to communicate with my former colleagues and people with whom I have not had the privilege of serving. But knowing the things that I know, I feel comfortable sharing my knowledge and getting confirmed by the fact that they do move in those directions when they are moving forward on the issues that I care about.
Anything that I didn't ask about that you wanted to talk about today?
One of the things that I did do that never got consummated was I tried to pass bills regarding death with dignity.
And you know what? And I got to be honest. So this has come up a lot. I'm going to tell you this, that folks have said your death with dignity bill is sort of the poster child that certain folks will use as, you've got to think about what bills you're doing and how they're going to affect the rest of the caucus. Because I think for certain people, they felt that your death with dignity bill gave folks running in more conservative districts a lot of issue with people being able to say, tying into the Sarah Palin death panel. Basically, that. None of it makes sense if you actually spell it out intellectually, mm-hmm. but that was the thing is that's her death panel bill.
Oh, it's like all the anti-abortion people and all of that stuff, mm-hmm. But
I guess tell us about your bill and what it was like trying to move it through the legislature.
I had to introduce this bill in 2 different legislatures. In the first one, I don't think it got out of the first committee of hearing. It was a difficult bill to deal with, lots of really sensitive issues.
And basically, it's a bill that would allow people who are terminal to mm-hmm. make the decision.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of very strict rules that other states. There's about 20 states that have medical aid in dying is mm-hmm. what they technically call them. And there's lots of
when
rules.
People choose to end their life, then there is a mechanism for them to do that.
That's right. And I think the second time I introduced a bill, there was a young woman named Brittany who had a brain tumor, a terminal brain cancer, who lived in California. She knew she was going to die, and she didn't want to deal with it. You know, she was young. She was in her 20s or maybe early 30s. And she had just gotten married and was facing this death sentence. And she literally had to move to Oregon in order to take advantage of Oregon's long in place, relatively successful program to allow medical aid in dying. And I learned so many interesting things about that. In Oregon's 20 years, they had issued maybe 800 sets of the medications, but nowhere near 800 people had eased their transition from this world into the next by utilizing them. But it gave them comfort that they had these.
The option.
One person said, just the fact that I have these pills in my pocket makes me grateful and able to deal with that round of pain or whatever it is that I'm dealing with my issue at this time. And I think I got it out of health and social services and was into hearings with judiciary the second time around. But I had people like David Eastman on my committee and Sarah Vance. It got really difficult.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I served on House Judiciary with David Eastman and Sarah Vance, and they were absolutely polar opposites on a lot of issues. And this is an issue where I could see them maybe being at opposites. I think David Eastman, from my experience, was very much about personal liberty. And I could see how there might be some sort of mechanism towards getting him on board. I mean, I could be wrong. The religion might take over.
Well, and at the same time, states around us and Canada all adopted medical aid in dying. I think in Canada, Canadian Supreme Court's reaction to one state's appeal of the passage of such a law said, oh, not only are we going to allow this one province to do this, but we're going to let all the rest of them do it. So Alaskans are surrounded by places that they would have to move to take advantage of this benefit, or if not completely across the country. And I don't think there's any reason that Alaskans should have to do that. That's my
and Matt Clayman was chair of judiciary. Was he supportive of the bill?
I don't recall. I remember he asked a lot of questions and requested that I take up this or that issue and polish it up here and there. But it never got beyond the second committee.
Got it.
I did end up with a great book by Atul Gawande. We gave that book to every member of every committee that was going to hear it so they could be educated on the issue.
Would you recommend? I'm going to pull it up because I like to have people recommend a book at the end.
Okay. Hold on a second.
I can find it.
No, it's on my bookshelf.
Being Mortal.
Yes, exactly. I've got one that's all tabbed and stuff from... And Atul Gawande is active currently. His name keeps coming up.
Well, he's written a lot for the New Yorker.
Yeah, he gets interviewed periodically on TV on other health issues because he is a health professional, bar none. And it's important to have the support of folks like that.
And I mean, I guess is the book about right to die, or is it about other issues as well?
It's about lots of medical issues, but right to die does play a prime role in that book.
Well, Harriet Drummond, thank you so much for being on the show today.
You are so welcome, Andrew. It's just delightful to see you.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@anchorag.gov or call 907-269-0123.